Hey, we've got some open spots. If you want to move closer, you're welcome to. You can even move further back if you want. I'm going to welcome those of us just joining us online right now at River of Life. Our purpose is to love God, love others. Our mission is to grow in God and to reach others. Here at River of Life, we're journeying through the Bible. I'm utilizing Donna Ryder's book and relying on it heavily. His story, the story of God in this journey. It's going to carry over into 2025. But in this journey, we've gone through Genesis and creation and all that, and the patriarchs. We've gotten to the point of God's people, the Israelites, are going out of Egypt. And God gave them a number of lessons as they were leaving Egypt. He revealed his name. He said, I'm Yahweh, the I am that I am. He revealed his power that was shown through the 10 plagues that came upon Egypt. He revealed his redemption through the Passover. He revealed his requirements through the 10 Commandments. And he revealed his holiness and the need to obey him through the tabernacles. And now we're looking at this time where they've left Egypt, they're in the wilderness, and God tests them. He gave the Israelites tests while they were in the wilderness. And I've titled this, How to Fail God's Tests. Because we're going to see over and over how the people failed. And if we say, okay, lesson, don't do that, because that's going to lead to failing his tests. Now, some of you may remember in school, some of you are still in school, standardized tests. And some have test anxieties. They can do homework like no tomorrow, but when tests come, they just clutch up, and it's an awful time. But the standardized tests are designed to show how much the student has learned of the content, and to see where improvement needs to be made. That's the goal of these standardized tests. So God's giving tests to his children. He already knows where they stand, but it's to let them know where they need improvement. Exodus 20:20, Moses said to the people, do not be afraid. God has come to test you so that the fear of God will be with you to keep you from sinning. So we're going to go through a number of tests here that they have, and most of them they fail, all right? That's why how to fail God's test. We've got a lot of scripture. You can maybe have a pen and pencil ready and paper and jot down real quick or take a picture. If you want a copy of this, I can send you the Canvas copy of it. But here we go. Their first test was right after they left Egypt. And at first they failed it, but then later they passed. It was on God's protection. See, Pharaoh realized that he just let go his slave labor. And now he changed his mind. After all those plagues, he's after them. So if you have your Bibles, and you should, turn to Exodus chapter 14. Exodus 14:10. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up. And if you're still trying to find Exodus, just stick there, because we're going to walk through Exodus. We're going to move into the book of Numbers. So Exodus 14, as Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified. They cried out to the Lord. Then they said to Moses, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. So they failed that test. They forgot that all the plagues, they forgot the differentiation that was there between Egypt and the Israelites. They forgot how powerful God was. Move forward to Exodus 14:29. But the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground. God had told Moses, go there, take your staff, part the waters, and it parted. The Israelites went through the sea on dry ground with a wall of water on their right and on their left. That day the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians lying dead on the shore. And when the Israelites saw the mighty hand of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared God. It meant they were in awe, in respect, in admiration of the Lord, and put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant. So they passed the test. They said, yeah, this is amazing. God is good. We're going to trust him with everything. Let's see how long that lasts. Their next test was bitter water. Exodus 15, verse 22. Then Moses led Israel from the Red Sea. They went into the desert of Shur. For 3 days they traveled in the desert without finding water. 3 days anywhere, even in the land of 10,000 lakes without water, you are wanting water desperately, desperately. Here they are in the desert, no water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink the water because it was bitter. That's why the place was called Marah. Marah means bitter. I mean, how awful. Here's water, and imagine they just flock to it. They taste it. They're spitting it out. They can't stand it. It's bitter. So the people grumbled against Moses, saying, what are we to drink? All right, they failed that test. Instead of looking to God, Exodus 15, verse 25, then Moses cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. A piece of wood. He threw it into the water, and the water became fit to drink. There, now here's a key. There the Lord issued a ruling and instruction for them and put them to the test. He said, if you listen carefully to the Lord your God and do what's right in his eyes, if you pay attention to his commands, keep all his decrees, I will not bring on you any of the diseases I brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. So God's saying something really important. Listen to me carefully. Do what I'm saying. Do what's right. And pay attention to the commands. Okay. Exodus 16. Their test is hunger. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, if only we died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death. Good question to ask is, didn't they have livestock and like herds and flocks with them? Well, they did. And I did a little looking, but not enough, obviously, because I'm still stumped by why they didn't just butcher some of their animals. I think there'd been something there of everything is going into the promised land. And so your herds and flocks are for sacrificing, but at this time holding off. So they're complaining, we don't have any food. And they completely forget their slavery in Egypt. They're always like wanting to go back, completely forgetting how bad it was there. So Exodus 16:13, that evening, quail came, covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. And when the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. That was manna. And from that point on, they had 40 years of manna that fed them in the desert. Now, Jesus had told his followers, don't worry about what you're going to eat or drink. Don't worry about what you're going to wear. The Lord knows all of these things, and he's going to take care of you. The next test is no water whatsoever. Exodus 17:3. But the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. They said, why did you bring us up out of Egypt to make us and our children and livestock die of thirst? So there's their livestock. They're thirsty too. Verse 5 of Exodus 17. Then the Lord answered Moses, go out in front of the people. Take with you some of the elders of Israel. Take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile and go. I will stand there before you by the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink. So Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel. And he called the place Massah and Meribah because the Israelites quarreled. So Massah means quarrel, and Meribah means tested, because they quarreled and they tested the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? So Moses strikes the water comes out of the rock. I mean, think of this. There's 600,000 men, and so it's not counting women and children. And so that's where we get this number of about 1 million, 1.5 million, possibly 2 million. So and their livestock. So water coming from the rock is satisfying all of them. So it's not just this drip. I mean, there's serious water coming. Next test, know Moses. Moses is up on Mount Sinai. God's given him the 10 Commandments, a lot of other regulations that God's talking to him about. He's up there 40 days. Somewhere in that window between 0 and 40 when Moses left, they're saying this, Exodus 32:1. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, "Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him." So their face completely went away from Moses and God and said, all right, make us an idol. He made the golden calf. Verse 32, chapter 32, verse 31. Moses went back to the Lord. He said, "Oh, what a great sin these people have committed. They've made for themselves gods of gold. But now please forgive their sin. But if not, then blot me out of the book you've written." Then the Lord replied to Moses, "Whoever has sinned, I will blot out of my book." And we're talking the book of life. "Now go lead the people to the place I spoke of, and my angel will go before you. However, when the time comes for me to punish, I will punish them for their sin." And the Lord struck the people with a plague because of what they did with the calf Aaron had made. So what God was doing there was teaching that everyone is responsible for God, not just Moses and Aaron. And for us, it's not just okay to be around the church, around people that are believers. You must be a believer. Sometimes we just want to draft in behind those who are, they're good people. I'm just going to hang around them. God calls you into that relationship with him. Next test. They're tired of manna. Numbers chapter 11. Now we're in a new book. Numbers 11, verse 4. The rabble with them began to crave other food. And again, the Israelites started wailing and said, "If only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we ate in the desert at no cost. Also the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic." Imagine their breath. "But now we've lost our appetite. We never see anything but this manna." Verse 18 of chapter 11, tell the people, this is God speaking to Moses, tell the people, "Consecrate yourselves in preparation for tomorrow when you will eat meat. The Lord heard you when you wailed, 'If only we had meat to eat, we were better off in Egypt.' Now the Lord will give you meat, and you will eat it. You will not eat it for just 1 day, or 2 days, or 5, or 10, or 20, but for a whole month, until it comes out of your nostrils and you loathe it, because you rejected the Lord who's among you, and you wailed before him, saying, 'Why did we ever leave Egypt?'" Now here's where Moses fails the test. Verse 21. But Moses said, "Here I am among 600,000 men on foot. And you say, I will give them meat to eat for a whole month? Would there have been enough flocks and herds were slaughtered for them? Would they have enough of all the fish in the sea were caught for them?" He's saying, I don't see how this can happen. Here's God's answer, verse 23. The Lord answered Moses, "Is the Lord's arm too short? Now you will see whether or not what I say will come true for you." And Scripture says that a wind blew and quail came into the camp 3 feet deep, for as far as a person could walk in a day. 3 feet deep of quail. I mean, just try and visualize this. 3 feet deep of quail, as far as a person could walk in a day, all around. And so they ate and got sick and all of those things. Point is, there's things that we have in our lives where we say, I don't see how God can answer that. I don't see how he could do it. I don't see, well, we can't see, but God can. All right, next test. Who to believe? He sends 12 spies. They're getting close to the land that God had promised to him. He sends 12 spies out. Go scout the land out and then come back and bring a report. So they were out for 40 days. They come back with a report. They say the land is really fruitful. The soil is good. They even carried some of the produce that they had, which was tremendous. They said, it's very fertile, but there's fortified cities. There's armies, and they're giants. They're big. 10 of the spies said, can't do it. We're worried for our families, our children. They're just going to get slaughtered. So we best not go up there. 2 said, yes, there's fortified cities. Yes, there's armies. Yes, they're big. They're giants. But God said we can beat them. So, and he promised this land, so let's go. That was Joshua and Caleb. And the people wanted to stone them for that report. So God says this, is that, you were so worried about your children, you're going to wander aimlessly in the desert for 40 years. And the children you were worried about, they'll go into the land, but you won't. Everyone that's an adult, that whole generation is going to die. So the next test happens the next day. We read in Numbers 14:39 to 45. When Moses reported this to Israelites, God's verdict, you're not going in. It's going to be 40 years before you go in. When Moses reported this to all the Israelites, they mourned bitterly. Early the next morning, they set out for the highest point in the hill country, saying, now we're ready to go up to the land God promised. Surely we've sinned. Basically, they're saying, okay, we changed our mind. Okay, God, you're right. We're going in. But Moses said, why are you disobeying the Lord's command? He said, you're not going in. It's 40 years. This will not succeed. Do not go up because the Lord is not with you. You will be defeated by your enemies. For the Amalekites, the Canaanites will face you there because you've turned away from the Lord. He will not be with you and you will fall by sword. My version is, you're going to get the snot beat out of you. Verse 44, nevertheless, in their presumption, they went up towards the highest point in the hill country, though neither Moses nor the ark of the Lord's covenant moved from the camp. Then the Amalekites and the Canaanites who lived in that hill country came down, attacked them, beat the snot out of them, and beat them down all the way back to Hormah. All right, next test, trusting God's leader. Number 16, we call this Korah's rebellion. Korah and a man named Dathan and Abiram, not Abraham, Abiram. It says they became insolent. They rose up against Moses. And with them they gathered 250 men, not just average men. These were well-known community leaders who had been appointed members of the council. They came as a group to oppose Moses and Aaron and said to them, you've gone too far. The whole community is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is with them. Why then do you set yourselves above the Lord's assembly? And they weren't. So Moses says, here's the deal. If Korah and these guys die kind of normal death, then the Lord hasn't sent me. But if something phenomenally different, like the earth opens up, swallows them up and all their stuff, and they die that way, then know that the Lord has sent me. Verse 31, as soon as he finished saying all this, the ground under them split apart. The earth opened its mouth, swallowed them and their households and all those associated with Korah, together with their possessions. They went down alive into the realm of the dead with everything they owned, and the earth closed over them, and they perished and were gone from the community. I mean, that'd be kind of like a quiet moment there, like, what just happened? Oh, my goodness. Next test, trusting God's leader, part 2. The next day, the whole Israelite community grumbled against Aaron and Moses. You've killed the Lord's people. I mean, they're pinning it on Moses. You've killed the Lord's people. They said, but when the assembly gathered in opposition to Moses and Aaron and turned toward the tent of meeting, suddenly the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord appeared. Then Moses and Aaron went to the front of the tent of meeting, and the Lord said to Moses, get away from this assembly, so I can put an end to them at once. It says, and they fell face down, and that's Moses and Aaron. They hit the deck. Moses tells Aaron, get a censer, put some incense in it, put some coals from the altar in it, and go out among the people and offer an atonement for them because the plague has come out. Remember, he said, if you listen to me, God had said, if you listen to me, if you follow me, do what's right, none of the plagues will come. But now it was happening because they weren't doing any of those things. So Aaron did as Moses said and ran into the midst of the assembly. The plague had already started among the people. But Aaron offered the incense and made atonement for them. He stood between the living and the dead, and the plague stopped. But 14,700 people died from the plague, in addition to those who died because of Korah's rebellion. You will have people, and you've had people that oppose you, that have hurt you, that stand against you, that have harmed you terribly. And you want revenge, you want justice, but you have to know that the Lord is the one that brings that, and he will bring it. And nobody gets away with anything in God's eyes. Maybe on this side, but never for eternity. He sees it, he will judge it. He may call you to be like Aaron, to go and offer forgiveness. Not because what they did was right, it was not right. But for his mercy and to intercede for them. That's what Aaron did. Next test, no water again. Numbers 20. Now there was no water for the community, and the people gathered in opposition to Moses and Aaron. They quarreled with Moses. If only we died when our brothers had fell dead before the Lord. Why did you bring the Lord's community into the wilderness, that we and our livestock should die here? Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to this terrible place? I mean, they're not very creative in their grumbling. It's like just default. We wish we were back in Egypt where we were slaves. This time, God says, Moses, take your staff, you and Aaron go, and you speak to the rock, and water will come out. Moses goes to the rock, he takes his staff, and this is where Moses fails the test, chapter 20, verse 9. So Moses took the staff from the Lord's presence, just as he commanded him. Remember, listening to the Lord, following what he's saying, obeying what he's commanded. He and Aaron gathered the assembly together in front of the rock, and Moses said to them, listen, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock? Then Moses raised his arm and struck the rock twice with his staff. God said, speak to the rock. He hit it, and he said, he was taking God's power on himself now. He says, must we do this, Aaron and I? I mean, I imagine he was ticked, he was tired, he was all of these things. We can give him a lot of rationale for this. We get there. But how's God treat this? Water comes out of the rock. Irregardless, God doesn't just say, well, you did it wrong. Everybody's going to die now. Sorry. By his mercy and grace, water comes out. Water's a community. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them. He says, you're not going to go there, Moses. All right, test the patience, Numbers 21. They travel around Mount Hor. They got impatient. They already had the thing of saying, you're going to be here 40 years before you get there. But it says they got impatient. And they spoke against God and against Moses. They said, why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? There's no bread. There's no water. And we detest this miserable food. They're saying we're sick of this manna. It's the same thing every day. So the Lord sent venomous snakes among them that bit the people, and many Israelites die. So Moses goes before God, pleads, and God says, make a snake, put it up, and all those who are bit that look at the snake, they won't die. And so Moses made a bronze snake, put it up on a pole, and then when anyone was bitten by a snake and looked at the bronze snake, they lived. That bronze snake became a snare later on. It became an idol they started worshiping instead of God. Centuries later, a man named Asaph wrote a song about these tests in the wilderness. In Psalm 78, he writes, in spite of all this, they kept on sinning. In spite of his wonders, they did not believe. How often they rebelled against him in the wilderness and grieved him in the wasteland. Again and again they put God to the test. They vexed the Holy One of Israel. They did not remember his power, the day he redeemed them from the oppressor. So Israel had much to learn. But what would your test scores be if you went through those tests? What would mine be? I think we have a lot to learn also. Paul wrote this to the Corinthian believers in the New Testament. These things happened to them as examples and were written down as warnings for us, on whom the culmination of the ages has come. So if you think you're standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. Here's our so now what? And the tests in your life today. Pass your tests. We know how to fail. It's by not listening to him, not following, not doing the right thing, not following his commands. So pass your tests by remembering your yea God stories, the times that you can look back and say, God did this, and God did this. And so I know he can get me through this. And trusting in him. We're going to celebrate communion, and if you're new here, Jesse Carlson will just help explain it. We're going to celebrate it both here and online. You can celebrate it. And it's a time of remembering the Lord, remembering his goodness, remembering that he's faithful, remembering that even when we fail a test, we can have a redo, we can have a mulligan, and he's so faithful and gracious. There are repercussions when we fail tests. But it's remembering he's coming back, and we have a relationship with him.